The Fringe Podcast, Summer Rewatch, Episode 10.
This is Lance Reddick, and you are listening to the Fringe Podcast.
Web hosting for the Fringe Podcast is provided by HostGator. Easy WordPress installation, unlimited domains, unlimited disk space, unlimited bandwidth, and a 99.9% uptime guarantee. On sale now for $6.36 a month. Visit thefringepodcast.com/hosting and start serving up your website from the best hosting company in any universe. Welcome back to the Fringe Podcast Summer Rewatch, as tonight we are kicking off Season 3 of Fringe. We've got some pretty awesome episodes to be talking about tonight. And seriously, folks, HostGator, good stuff. We've been using them for all of our hosting needs for about 4 years now. And with some of my personal projects, I've tried other hosting companies. HostGator is the best. So seriously, if you're looking for web hosting, go over to our website over at Golden Spiral Media or thefringepodcast.com. Click on that banner. We would sure appreciate it. We get a very nice commission from our friends at HostGator when you guys do that. So tonight we are, as I mentioned, starting Season 3 of Fringe. We've got 5 episodes we're talking about tonight, and we've got 3 awesome co-hosts. In fact, I think for the first time ever, we have the same set of co-hosts this week that we had last week. And in both cases, that wasn't scheduled, but we have 3 hosts scheduled every week, and then we have an alternate in case somebody drops out. We had somebody drop out last week. Lou came in as an alternate. We had somebody drop out this week. Heather came in as an alternate. So it turns out that we have Lou and John and Heather again this week for your listening pleasure. How are each of you tonight?
I'm doing good.
Doing great, thanks, Joe.
Same here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm looking forward to tonight. You know, getting into Season 3, and we're getting closer to Season 4, which is obviously where we've left off with the story of Fringe. We have the alternate universe now coming heavily into play, and meeting these characters. I was going to say for the first time. I mean, obviously all of us have met them before, but in the scheme of the timeline of the show, I should say, we're meeting them for the first time, and it sure is a whole lot of fun. Looking forward to talking with you guys about these episodes tonight. We don't have to make any introductions tonight since all of you guys have been on with us before. But I do have some news to talk about. So let's get into the Fringe Binge.
It's time to get the scoop on Fringe. It's the Fringe Binge. The Fringe Binge.
All right. Don't have a whole lot this week, but a couple of noteworthy things, so we're going to cover those. The biggest news coming out of Fringe this week was that production has been shut down. You know, it just started. I think last week we announced that it had just started filming, and I don't know if they got a full week in or not, but they have shut down temporarily Season 5 production on Fringe, and it's because John Noble and Blair Brown are sick. And it sounds like originally they said they were shutting it down for a couple of days, or through the end of the week, which would have been a couple of days, because both of them were sick. And then they came out the next day and said, you know what, looks like we're going to have to shut it down for 2 weeks because John's illness is pretty, I hate to say severe. I don't know how severe it is, but if you shut it down for 2 weeks, it's not just a cold or anything like that. Apparently, he is suffering from a lack of sleep, and they are attributing this to some of the travel that he did. He went straight from Australia to Comic-Con to Vancouver, and a lot of this time zone jumping and just his busy schedule. So he's having some issues with that, and so they're getting him some treatment for that, and I don't know what that means. If you're not sleeping, you can't function. It's very, very dangerous if that continues to exist. So I'm sure it's a very serious matter, and we're certainly hoping a very speedy recovery for John, hoping the best for him. So I think they shut it down on Wednesday or Thursday, and they said they were going to be shut down for 2 weeks. So it will not affect the series premiere of Season 5. I don't know about anything beyond that. I can't have filmed a whole lot at this point. So we'll see. Now, we also learned this week that the series, this is kind of sad to say, but the finale will air, boy, if I could talk, in January. we had been wondering, they're going to start it on September the 28th. We had been wondering, are they going to go 13 straight episodes? Well, you've got the World Series that is going to come into play there, and then you've got Thanksgiving, and then you getting really close to some of the American holidays, other holidays. So it really was doubtful in my mind that they would air straight through. So we found out this week that they are going to be wrapping up this show as far as airing the episodes goes in January. I believe they will stop production. They'll wrap up production in late November, early December. So that's what we're looking at now. So what I mean, kind of tying that back in with John Noble, I don't know if this means we're going to get a break earlier in the season rather than later because of what this does to production, or if they're just going to work longer hours and fight through it. I don't know, but. That's the latest news that we have, is that they've shut down production for 2 weeks. It will not affect the season premiere, but beyond that, I haven't heard anything else. But I'm sure that John appreciates all the prayers that people are sending his way, and we're certainly hoping for a speedy recovery for him. Other news that we have related to Fringe this week, we have a couple of other things that came up. The first one came from our friends over at Fringe Bloggers, and they have posted the Season 4 DVD back cover copy. And I'm not going to read the whole synopsis. You guys are Fringe fans. You know what Fringe is all about. You know what Season 4 is all about. But I am going to read to you what the special features are on the DVDs. And it says we have A World Without Peter, which is insights into how the absence of Peter Bishop impacts the Fringe world. We have The Observers, which explores how Season 4 goes deeper into the mythology of the mysterious observers. We have Beyond the Comic Book. It says, with an introduction by series star Joshua Jackson and executive producers J.H. Wyman and Jeff Pinkner about the inception of the comic book Beyond the Fringe, Peter and the Machine. It also has a digicomic excerpt from the comic book Beyond the Fringe, Peter and the Machine. And it has a gag reel for all of you who like to see them mess up, curse, and laugh. So it should be a whole lot of fun. I can't wait for these to come out. In case you don't recall the date, it is September the 4th. And if you are going to be purchasing those, we invite you to go over to thefringepodcast.com. You'll see a little picture of all the DVDs right there on our right-hand sidebar. If you click on that, it'll take you over to Amazon. And anything you purchase at Amazon, whether it's the DVDs or a bacon crisper, we'll get a little commission for that, and so we would sure appreciate anything that you do there so we can help pay the bills here at Golden Spiral Media. One other thing this week to talk about before we get into these episodes, and that is the Saturn Awards. Now, the Saturn Awards kind of lean towards sci-fi, so Fringe has always performed well in the Saturn Awards as opposed to the Emmy Awards, which they got snubbed for again this year. But the Saturn Awards were held earlier this week, and Anna Torv won Best Actress on Television. So congratulations for Anna. Fringe won Best Network Television Series. That's pretty awesome as well. Now, John Noble was nominated as Best Supporting Actor on Television. That award went to Aaron Paul on Breaking Bad. And Orla Brady, who plays Peter Bishop's mother, she was nominated as Best Guest Star on Television, and that went to Tom Skerritt on Leverage. So yeah, I don't know why I said Peter Bishop's mother, not Elizabeth Bishop, but anyway, same person, I guess. So that's our news for this week, and having said all of that, it's time to get into these episodes with our food for thought.
Root beer float.
Butterscotch pudding.
Mr. Papaya. Fruit cocktail. Coffee yogurt.
All right, we are kicking off Season 3, as I mentioned tonight, and as when we last left our heroes, they had gone over to the other side to get Peter from the other side, and the old switcheroo was pulled right at the end of Season 2. Faux Olivia came back to the Blueverse. Olivia was held captive in the Redverse, and so this picks up right where that left off. The synopsis from our friends over at fringepedia.net says, Olivia fights to find her way home after an extremely deceptive tactic leaves her imprisoned and under interrogation in the parallel universe. The Bishops move on with life in the aftermath of the revolutions about Peter's childhood, Bolivia, which is what we call Folivia, begins her infiltration and espionage mission in this universe without raising suspicion. This episode was written by Joel Wyman and Jeff Pinkner and directed by Joe Chappelle. All right, Lou, you are up first. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I put myself on mute. Just leveraging off what you said there about Fringe doing well at the Saturns, but not having too much luck at the Emmys. This stretch of episodes is arguably Anna Torv's. If somebody cannot get nominated and win an Emmy for what she does in this season, especially in the first half, it's a bit of a crime, I think. And she is just fantastic in this episode and the ones that follow. I'm going to take a little bit of different tack. I'm going to talk about casting, and I'll leave story points to the other guys. Fringe does a great job with casting, and I think this episode is just the epitome of that. They've got three great guest stars. Andre Royo, who we all, if you know The Wire, who played Bubbles on that show, he plays a taxi driver in this one. He's fantastic. Amy Madigan, who probably is best known from Field of Dreams, as and also for me, Streets of Fire was where I first remember her, and that's a movie. I don't know if you've seen that one, Daryl, but it's definitely worth looking up.
Okay,
it's a rock and roll fable, and it takes kind of place in an alternate reality, I guess you could say.
Okay,
and the opening scene, which is just so cleverly done because it basically gives us a recap of where the series has been and where it's and where things are right now. And Gabrielle Rose plays a psychiatrist, and she has that one of those. I guess it's meant to be a maternal smile, but it's just one that's just very irritating through the whole scene. You can tell Olivia just wants to kind of get up and smack her.
Yeah,
because she's being very condescending. So I just love the actors that they got for this episode, and especially Andre Royo. If you've watched The Wire, the character that he plays in this episode sort of leverages off of that. So if you haven't seen the series, The Wire, then his role probably doesn't impact you as much. But for me, it kind of references in a couple of speeches his character arc for that series. So he really sells in this episode a character that, when somebody's on the run and they meet somebody and that person helps them. A lot of times you're wondering, why would this person go out of the way to help this other person? But in this episode, his presence, because of his work on The Wire, really sold it to me. And I love the moments between him and Anna Torv in this episode. And I thought that he really sold that. And the other thing I wanted to touch on, the scene where Anna or Olivia's trying to go to Massive Dynamic, and she walks out into that sort of park area and realizes that she's not going to get back home. And then the dirigible comes, and she looks over her shoulder. That, to me, this was set up the same as episode later on, Subject 13, when she's running from her stepfather and goes around the corner of the stairs or whatever, and she looks and there's a dirigible overhead as well. So I thought that was, we get this set up here and the payoff much later down in the series. So there's a lot of great sight bits in here, and I think I'll leave that for the rest of you guys to discuss.
All right, I'll scratch my note about the dirigible off my note list of things to talk about.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all. I caught the same thing and thought the same thing. All right, John, what about you?
Okay. Well, just echoing off of what Lou said, that was my first note, was Andre Royo just really sold this episode to me. It was a wonderful performance. I thought the moment where Olivia she got to the bathroom and took a break and took an appraisal of the situation and started crying in the stall, that was a very powerful moment, very well shot by the director. Funny, she says that she's not much of a shot, but I don't know if she just doesn't remember, but her point-blank accuracy of shooting everybody right between the eyes is pretty much a good shot to me. Anyway, there's no Massive Dynamic, as Lou mentioned. Interesting choice for the Redverse. Her mother, this was the key in the episode to me, says, if you've never been here before, how did you know to come here?
Yeah.
and that's where she turns and says, okay, maybe this is me, then maybe this is all correct. And when they go back to the Bluverse for just a little bit, and Peter's giving his testimony to Senator Van Horn, so the senator asks him, why did you come back? And the edit is immediately to Olivia sitting on the steps. Yeah. And I think that was powerful. I'm not sure that they left his motivation on the table in the season ender from season 2. But this showed that this really was why he chose to come back. He knew the purpose of the machine. He knew all that while he was over there. But his whole reason for coming back was centered around Olivia. So
yeah, definitely.
It was great.
Yeah, and I had a very similar note on that line there about she's not a crack shot. And I think it was intended to be a line that would cause the audience to go, oh no, is she turning? But for me, it had the opposite effect because we all know that she's a crack shot. You know, she hits people between the eyes when she shoots at them, you know? So I thought that line wasn't effective. Now, like you said, later when she meets with her mom, that was very effective. It's like, oh crap, now she really is changing. I do believe what she says here, but I don't know. I could have done without the whole bit there where she's not a crack shot, because if you watch the show at all, you know that she is. All right, Heather, what about you?
Okay, I'm gonna also, like was mentioned, praise season 3, which I'm gonna say is the most exciting season. Consistently every week, I was shocked and worked up at the end of each episode and looking forward to the next one. I always enjoy the episodes and wonder what's gonna happen next. But season 3 was where I was like, you know, on the edge of my seat waiting for the next episode. So I was enjoying watching them again. So now my notes. So we have at the first when Brandon has her in his lab. She's in a blue gown and she's strapped down with red straps.
Yep.
So it's like her being from the Bluverse is being held down or attacked by the Redverse.
Okay, I like it.
Like what we're getting with the Bluverse being attacked by the, and then the Bluverse fights back, like Olivia fights back. Another thing I noticed, which I don't remember noticing before, is that in Henry's cab, hanging from the rear view mirror, he has a cross.
Yes.
And then when they stop at the gas station, he clasps his hands together and bows his head on the trunk of his cab to pray while he's looking at his family photo. So that made me think of in a few episodes when they mentioned like how there's every time a Fringe event happens, a new church is created, and the idea that the Redverse is like more religious, or just they have different, like everything's falling apart, but then they have those different values versus our universe where everything's fine, but maybe we're more callous and unbelieving. So I thought that was interesting. When he's driving her to the safe house, he says like, oh, your guy must be quite a guy, and she does this like snort laugh and says Frank. And so I think that's a beginning of course, we get to see some of alter Olivia's personality, because compare this to the first episode when she's all pensive and sad and quietly says Peter. So I thought that was interesting, getting the other personality jumping out.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good, yeah.
Olivia says more than once, I'm not who they say I am, or I'm not who you think I am. And so it's her, like, it's in the theme of things aren't always as they seem, and perceptions not always real, or like you can be tricked, which has always been a theme with the doppelgangers and the shapeshifters. Of, you know, maybe you don't always know who is who, but the idea is continued when Henry is talking about his wife and says, she saw the man I knew I was, just like Olivia knows who she is. So she looks the same, but she knows she's different on the inside than the other Olivia. And we get the same idea with the different, like, Peter, who looks the same as the other Peter, but he has to choose sides, so he's different inside. And then later we have Broyles from the alternate universe who looks the same as the other Broyles, or he looks like he should be loyal to alternate, but he changes because he's different on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. I noticed at her mom's house when they arrived, her mom's front door is red.
Yes.
Like her entry to the other side, her final step to becoming the other Olivia by going into the red door house. And at the very end, when Peter's talking to the senator, and he says his pen's dying, and he says, "Do you want me to fix it or not?" And of course, Peter's the one that ends up fixing things when he uses the machine, in a way. And so here's our, well, he's kind of the fix-it man who helps fix Walter, and he's going to be fixing lots of other things. There's all my thoughts.
Okay, very good. I've got why did I rip the headphones out of my ears here? I've got a couple other small little notes. One is we saw Senator Van Horn back last season briefly, and now we see him again in this episode. I think there's no question at this point that he is the shapeshifter, and a lot of that has to do with we're going to see him here again in just a couple of episodes where he is undoubtedly a shapeshifter, but I think it's worth noting in the timeline of things, I think at this point he is a shapeshifter. I thought it was interesting in the dialogue with the shrink at the beginning of the episode. Olivia said that she works for the FBI in Fringe Division, or works in Fringe Division for the FBI. And the shrink didn't say anything at all about the FBI not existing, or what do you mean the FBI? And so again, it makes me wonder. That's the second time in the Redverse we've heard FBI and no one has said, "Hey, yellow flag here." So it just makes me wonder if they had yet thought about FBI not being existent in the Redverse, but not a big deal either way.
In the context of her talking to the psychiatrist,
Uh-huh.
she's already saying all kinds of crazy things. So
True,
the
that's right.
psychiatrist just forget that she's mentioning that too.
Yeah, she may just be letting her roll with it. This is her chance to talk.
Yeah.
Not really. I completely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a note here about Anna Torv. Lou, you started out talking about the characters. Anna was in. I started to go back and count, but I decided that would take too much time that I didn't have. But it's about a 43, 44 minute episode typically. I bet you she was in 40 minutes of it. I mean, she was in almost every single. You had a couple of scenes with Broyles and Walternate. So there's a couple little scenes there where she wasn't, but she did so good. It was so demanding on her, and I know Jessica has talked a couple of times on camera, and then we've talked privately about this. So, but since she's mentioned it on camera, I'll mention it. But this was a time during this season where Anna was getting a little bit burned out, and maybe not at this point, but she will get to that point in this season because so much was being demanded of her, and that has since passed, and I don't know what all they've done differently, but. This episode, she was demanded of a lot. She was in every single scene almost, and I thought she did just a wonderful, wonderful job. She is such a talented actress, and I'm glad the Saturn Awards recognized it. I wish that the Emmys would recognize the work that she does and John Noble does and so many others. I know they can't all be nominated for everything, but those two, to me, stand out above the rest and should get some recognition. But anyway, I thought it would be worth mentioning that I thought that she did such a good job in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it. I think. This I don't know if this is worth mentioning, but I will. They were trying to predict what Olivia was going to do, and as far as would she go home, would she escape to another country, would she go back to the opera house, and the highest probability was that she would go to another country. But that's not what Olivia did, and I just thought, that was a clue to their team that this Olivia is not their Olivia. She's going to respond a little bit differently, just a little bit differently than the way their Olivia would, but not a big deal, but something I noticed. All right. Any other thoughts on Olivia?
Yeah, I loved the irony of Olivia being a prisoner on Liberty Island. I always find that a nice touch. And we get to see Walternate feels as justified about his actions as Walter did on his side. And I love the last shot on our side with Peter and Olivia and Walter out on the steps there. Kind of reminded me of the last shot of the Raiders of the Last Ark when Indy's out coming out on the steps there as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I just got a Raiders of the Lost Ark vibe there. So I thought that was really cool as well. And there was a lot of sight gags in here, but I'm sure you've mentioned them in previous podcasts. But
Yeah.
like the dogs being on the taxi for the play, and the gas station being a Shexon, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know the
So
way
there's a lot
mentioned
of cool
that
stuff
past,
in
but
here for sure.
Yeah.
And of course we got the red credits, which is cool.
Awesome. Yep. Definitely. All right. Anything else? All right. The glyphs in this episode spelled amber. And as far as the clue goes, I really couldn't find anything. I read through some forums. Fringepedia didn't have anything. The only suggestion I even found, and I went back and looked through over 600 photos of this episode, and I didn't really find anything that just really stuck out to me. But the one suggestion I found was that the door knocker on Olivia's mother's house had a boy and a girl kissing. Now, if this next episode would have been the episode where Faux Olivia gets knocked up, I would have thought that would be a great clue to the next episode. But at the very least, Olivia, or Faux Olivia, and Peter do kiss in this next episode. So I wish they kissed at the end of this episode. I don't know. I don't think that's what it is. I don't think that's our episode clue. So I don't know what it is. But anyway, the next episode is The Box. And the synopsis is: the bishops collaborate to investigate a mystifying case of citizens frozen in a trance-like state, a state induced by a mysterious box. Faux Olivia turns up the heat on Peter. Walter and Nina meet at Massive Dynamic and learn about the important events that are destined to happen in the future. This was written by Josh Singer and Graham Rowland and directed by Jeff Hunt. John? The floor is yours.
All right. Loved the note from Belle to Walter. Just simply said, "Don't be afraid to cross the line."
Uh-huh.
And very powerful from all their history. I loved that we got back to more of season 1 and early season 2 Walter, of just working the case and his, just his personality really coming through again. The music while they were looking at the brainwaves, the Figaro versus the Miami Vice theme was a great scene.
Yes.
Look at my brainwaves on the monitorio.
That was good. That was good, John.
Just
Yeah.
to try. Well, Clint's not here, so somebody's got to say it. So, Walter and Astrid are just a beautiful, beautiful pair. When he gets the Massive Dynamic shares, after he goes to the safe deposit box by himself, which I thought was just a big thing for him to do.
Sure.
He went to her house, shared it with her first, and just loved their interaction in this episode. They're just such confidants for each other. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great word, confidant. I mean, of all the people he went to, he chose Astrid. I mean, it speaks volumes about their relationship.
Yeah. I loved that he tried to explain things to Peter, and even that Peter was resistant.
Yeah.
I'm very, very glad that the writers chose to go there and try and show the repercussions of this. Walter says, I should have never crossed that line, but he says, "I love you, Peter." And to my knowledge, we've never heard that in the series until that point.
Yeah, I don't know.
Looking at Olivia, I didn't remember very well until watching this episode again why folks didn't like her so much, and this was the case that really solidified why we don't like her. I know she's ordered to take care of things, and she's all about the mission, but shooting the deaf man in the back of the head, and then covering it up while she's making out with Peter was just a little bit more than I could take from her character. And it's interesting, as we get toward the end of season 4 and the Redverse is going to go away, I think a lot of that was put by the wayside, and we felt least I felt, that I was genuinely going to miss Olivia. But then I came back to this episode, and it was just like, oh, this is horrible. This is just her character is just terrible, and I don't know that was ever really resolved. So anyway, loved Peter saying, "You have no idea. I've seen the damage that he did."
Yeah.
Very powerful statement. The head explosion was also something I didn't remember, and
me either.
Leaped out of my chair. And love Walter after that, saying, "I've always hated dentists." So, Peter saying, "Would anything surprise you?" And Walter's comeback of bacon flavored pudding.
Yes,
that would surprise me. So,
yeah.
So great to see everybody sort of back in form from season 1 and season 2, like I mentioned before. This was a fun episode to me, and also interesting the interaction with Olivia and Newton, and found her lessons to be in terms of what she needed to know about this side and everything was just a great interaction.
Yeah.
So that's all I got.
Okay, Heather.
Okay, we get Walter Olivia telling Peter we should figure out what the machine does. So we have her doing her mission there. And then at the beginning of the episode, when they're arguing, Walter's saying he doesn't want to work on the machine, and Rolf is saying, well, it's dangerous, so we have to know what it does. And then he talks about Oppenheimer and says that's the kind of thing that they use to convince Oppenheimer to make the bomb. So he's identifying with Oppenheimer. But the last time he's mentioned in the show was in the episode Peter in 1985, when Carla Warren is trying to tell him not to cross over.
Yes.
And she quotes the "I am become death," and Walter doesn't care. He's like, and he says, "Don't quote Oppenheimer at me. There's only one God in this lab, and it's not yours."
Right.
And so, but after all this time, now he's had the experience of his invention destroying the world, and now we get to see how he's been changed from before not caring and now scared of what might happen.
Yeah. I'm going to interrupt you just a sec, because that's such a good point. John, you mentioned what William Bell said, "Don't be afraid to cross the line." And I remembered something in the LSD episode. I was like, William and Walter had an interaction here in the LSD episode that I thought was very similar to that. And I went and looked through the transcript of that episode. And the thing that William gave Walter for advice was that when they were young, they didn't have humility to kind of rein them in. And now that he has humility to rein him in, he can do things that wouldn't be advisable when they were younger. And Heather, that's exactly what you're saying right there. And it's a good way of looking at what they did when they were younger. And even though they're doing a lot of dangerous things now, and some of that is to correct the mistakes they made when they were younger, but they are different now, and their motives are different now. Their wisdom is different now. Their humility is different now. So good point.
I have one other thing. I didn't write down who said it, but they're saying I think it was when they're reading William the will.
Okay.
And one of the lines is, "It's transition that's difficult." And of course, the transition we see more often is the transition between worlds, which is difficult, and that's why Walter wants Olivia, because that's hard for them.
Okay. All right, Lou.
Well, there's so much in this episode. It's going to be hard for me to condense it down, but I'll do my best here.
All right.
But we get the dynamics of what the season is going to be like, because last week or a previous episode we were in the Redverse. Now we're in the Bluverse. We're getting the blue credits, and as John said, I love one of the things I really love about Fringe is they take time to explore the consequences of actions. They do this on an ongoing basis, and more often than not, especially with the relationships, I find they answer the common sense questions that we would normally ask says, why don't they ask this question? And then next episode, there you go. They ask the question that we all had on our mind. So I really love how they do that. And the previous episode had a great opening on Olivia's, leap off the island. It's just iconic for me. And this one here with the everybody kind of in a trance and the blood running off their out of their noses and that, and their eyes turning white. Just another freaky Fringe opening. I just love it. And you're trying to figure out, well, how does this one guy survive? Like you just can't. Like you're going through your mind, like, how can this guy survive? Because you're not hearing anything, and you don't know that it's ultrasonics at this point. But and it was interesting, and I don't know if this was meant to be a tie-in into the next episode, but Newton hired these guys, and apparently their last job was in Texas. Well, we know in the next episode, Frank's going to Texas because of a smallpox virus. So there's a little bit of synchronicity between the timelines working here, or maybe that's just coincidence. I don't know, but I thought it was kind of a nice tie-in between the two. It was interesting, and John picked up on the tension between Newton and Olivia, and I thought that played very well in the episode. And kind of get the feeling that Olivia might be a great Fringe agent, but playing like a cover agent. I don't think she's quite as adept at it, and it's proving to be harder for her than she thought it would be. I love Walter's trying to make Jean make chocolate milk.
Yes.
That was great. He calls Astrid Aspirin, one of my favorite nicknames. There were some great scenes with Peter and Olivia. They're in the restaurant, and she says she wants to dance to Crazy by Patsy Cline. I thought that was a nice touch. And they were talking about it feels like I'm in a bad cop movie, like, oh yeah, like you're handcuffed to a mad scientist that wants to take you to another universe and stuff like that. And talking about Olivia looking good as a redhead. And what I really liked is throughout the episode, we see Olivia's, the tension of her trying to play both sides because she wants to, she has her mission. And during most of the episode, it seems like it's in conflict with what's happening in the case of the week with this box. But by the end, it turns out that they do want Peter to find it. So, but it was just interesting. You're getting like these layers. Like, which side is she playing now? Is she working on a point for our side, or is it something of her deeper mission? So I love that. And Walter's reference about the victims looking like Monet's water lilies was a nice one. And of course, the brain suck sound. I don't think I'll ever forget that. And he says it sounds oddly comforting. But and then he had the brain on his tie. That was like, and it turned out to be raspberry jam. Another nice touch.
Yeah.
And what else we got here? The realization. I think Olivia's starting to realize that we're not the monsters that Walter paints us out to be, and we're, as an audience, starting to see that the other side aren't monsters as well. So I love the dynamics going both ways as we get to know the other universe as well. It's interesting. They're trying to figure out how the machine pieces can be on both sides. And I love Olivia's Bono remark. And how am I going to... photographic memory. How am I going to fake that?
Yes.
So that was really well done as well. And I love once Peter's Olivia shoots the guns on both sides of his head. I love that whole sequence of the silence as he's trying to defuse the piece of the box. So there was a lot of great stuff in here. And the big point for John mentioned is, and I don't know if the writers regret this story point, but I think Olivia shooting the deaf guy from behind. I know on our podcast that was like a point of no return for the rest of the season. It wouldn't matter what they did to show Olivia in a good light, but that one act just totally tainted that character in this timeline for everyone in our podcast for the rest of the season. So that was an interesting decision that the writers took, and it caused a lot of interesting discussions for our podcast. So and I had one more point here, and then I can't seem to find it. I apologize. I can't find it, so I think I will bow out at that point.
All right. Well, I'll give you a chance to say other thoughts before we
I
move
just
on.
found it,
so.
but I'll save it till the end.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. I was curious, and I don't know if anybody else noticed, but the machine bot part, there was writing on
Yes.
it, and to me, it looked like observer writing.
Me too.
But that doesn't make any sense because we know going down the road that Walter and Peter built the machine. But is there maybe because what's happening in season 5 that I don't know, maybe September helps them build the machine as well? I don't know. Maybe that's an Easter egg.
I had the same question.
The box that the part was in has observer writing, but we don't know if the box and the part were hidden at the same time.
True.
What if the observers found the part later and put it in the box? Or,
Or, in the comic book, it was Sam and Peter that were going through time together, but the observer was there. I don't like that theory.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I like Heather's thought a lot better than mine, that's for sure. But I had the same question. Lou keeps stealing all my notes, which is okay. I have a couple of notes, though, that you didn't take. I thought it was a pun intended, but in the reading of Belle's last will and testament, he told Nina that he had always been her right hand and she'd always been his, but he replaced her right hand, so that was kind of punny. We saw the bell, though, which is now phase 2 of soul magnets. He gave them to her earlier when she went over to the Twin Towers. Now we have the bell in place, so his little scheme is being planted along here. The other thing, and I had the deaf guy note too. Lou, you're absolutely right, and John, you mentioned it as well. That totally just, who does that, And
Yep.
she was not going to kill him until Newton taunted her, and I'll talk more about that relationship when we do the next episode. But man, Newton just knew how to push her buttons. But anyway, that totally, and I think what it did really is it not only shaped our opinion of Olivia, it shaped our opinion of everyone from the Redverse. Now, as I'm rewatching this and knowing the full story of Waldron and how he found out what happened to Peter, kind of helped me understand his frame of mind. But I don't have the animosity towards him that I did at this point watching it originally. But man, killing the deaf guy, that's just hardcore, and then making out with Peter so he doesn't discover it. That really shaped a lot of our opinions as well. The only other note I think I have here is it was a different, when Walter came to Astrid's house at the very end, it was a completely different house than we see in season 4 Making Angels, where she's living with her dad. Of course, she could have moved in that time frame, and it's not a big deal, but it was an inconsistency that I noticed where her house in this episode is completely different than the one we'll see in season 4.
Do we know that she lives with her dad? Maybe she just always has dinner with him on that day of the week and she stopped at his house.
Well, I don't know. I hadn't thought of that. Could be. Sure could. All right, any other thoughts on the box?
Ultrasonics, silent but deadly.
Yeah, and I remember that Clint did not like this science because whether you're deaf or not, the sound waves would affect you. So being deaf would not have spared you from it. But
okay, because it doesn't have to travel along the auditory or canal, though.
Not according to Clint, and he's sciencey. I'm not, so I'll defer to him.
Well, even though he's deaf, he still has his ear canal and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, depends on what kind of birth defect he had, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, well, the glyphs... yes, go ahead, John.
Just one more point on Olivia and the deaf guy in the shooting. You can't rationalize it, but I think we do need to take into account that, for all intents and purposes, these characters believe that they are at war.
That's right.
That we are destroying, minute by minute, their world, and
right.
so there are all kinds of atrocities that happen in war, and we would like for her character not to have gone that far, but whether Newton goaded her into it or not, is is it quote unquote rationalized or justifiable or whatever if you're in a state of war? So I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm sure that's where the writers we're possibly looking at it from that angle. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And thank you for bringing that up. And Newton is very much, we'll see it come into play in Do Shapeshifters Dream of Electric Sheep. His mentality towards this whole thing is nothing but war. We are in war and take no prisoners. And that's why he was goading her into it, because that's the mentality he felt like you had to have in a situation of war. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll just add to that, and we're going to see that in a later episode. These shapeshifters, like we assume they're kind of like robots, but I think Newton's a little bit PO'd that he's been, like he's told Olivia, he's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
I think he's a little PO'd that she's stepping in and stepping on top of his authority. So,
Sure.
He feels that he can do the better job, and yet she just waltzes in and takes over the show. So I think he's, even though he's a shapeshifter android, he's still unhappy with the situation.
Yeah. All right. The glyphs spelled alert. And no doubt this time when she came out of Blake's, who's the deaf guy, when she came out of his apartment into the alleyway, and he ends up reading her lips and writing down her name, there on the doorway you see written down, "The pen is mightier." So there's no doubt that is our clue for the next episode, which is The Plateau. The synopsis reads, Alternate Fringe Division investigates a drug treatment experiment that intellectually enables patients. Secretary Bishop shares his strategic plan with Colonel Broyles about the importance of Olivia. Confusing visions surface in Olivia's mind as she adapts to Faulivia's life. This was written by Alison Skapker and Monica Owusu-Breen and directed by Brad Anderson. I'll make one point here before I turn it over. Who's up first? Heather's up first on this one. When I was at at Comic-Con, there was a panel of, I think it was Powerful Women in Pop Culture or something like that. And Anna Torv was part of that. And one of the questions asked, I think it was by the audience, but it might have been by the moderator, was, can you tell when an episode has been written by a woman versus a man? And Anna Torv said, absolutely, I can tell when a woman has written the episode versus a man has written the episode. I don't know if this is one of those episodes where she knew or not, but it is worth pointing out that this one was written by Allison and Monica, and I love their episodes. I've been a big fan of theirs. I love when they get behind the writing, and I think they do a great job. All right, so with that having been said, Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, we have during the first episode, Walter mentions that crossing between the universes comes with dangerous consequences, which apparently when Olivia uses her cortexiphan skills, she has no consequences, so that's why she's so valuable that way. And then I was drawing parallels with Milo and Olivia. So Olivia was experimented on when she was a child, and Milo was childlike when he was experimented on.
I like that.
And then Milo's sister says that she worries he'd never be happy or feel like he belonged. And Olivia has these same feelings. So Milo ends up that way because of his condition and then his experiment, and Olivia ends up feeling like she doesn't quite belong because of the experiments on her. And so both experiments, they want to make them better, but it scarred them in some way, so they weren't like regular people. And so Milo, he can't have regular feelings because his mind is too busy, and Olivia's feelings were enhanced and used by the cortexiphan to make her skills happen, and so those got messed up too. And so I thought they were kindred spirits in a way there.
Yeah.
Where they both did amazing things, but they were pushed too far to make that happen. And another thing I thought was interesting, near the end, Olivia, because she doesn't take her oxygen breath, and Charlie's getting after her, And he says, so Alter Olivia, she skips for oxygen because she's a daredevil, and Olivia would skip her oxygen because she just wants to catch the bad guy. And so is the two personalities. So Alter Olivia is like a thrill seeker. For example, she has her thrill of winning a gold medal in the Olympics. But Olivia, I think she's had enough excitement in her life from having traumatic experiences that she doesn't seek out traumatic experiences beyond what she already has in her job. So she'll risk her life for her job, but not just to show.
I like that. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's all my notes.
That's all you have?
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't mean anything by that.
Someone mentioned before, I didn't make note of everything that was different between this universe and the other universe, because in lots of podcasts and things before we mentioned those. So I was trying to think of new stuff I'd not thought of or heard before.
Okay. All right, Louis, what about you?
Well, I do have some. I did listen to the commentary as well. Did you listen to the commentary, Dylan?
I did not, no.
Oh, okay,
I
good.
did. I did.
Okay, I'll try not to take all of them, John. I'll leave a couple, but it's interesting. I'm just leveraging off what you just said, Heather. They asked Anna Torv when she was developing for Olivia what was the difference between the two characters, and Anna said Olivia wants to catch the bad guy, Olivia just wants to win. So I think that really ties in nicely with the points that you were making about her. So I love the opening of this episode. Again, Michael Eglin, he was one of their better guest stars. He really took on this role and made it into something pretty fantastic. I think the opening sequence with the pen, and it's sort of like the the ultimate mousetrap domino sequence leading to that woman getting hit by the bus. And the way they put it all together.
Stole my note again.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm just going to give you a hard time now.
Next time you go before me.
No, that's fine.
And the way they shot the last scene of the opening, that it's from over his shoulder back towards the bus.
Mm-hmm.
He's just walking away, and he never even looks back because he doesn't have to. He knows the result. So it's just a fantastic opening. One of the Fringe does really great openings, and this is one of their better cold openings. And apparently, this actor added quite a bit to the character. He came up with the finger movements while he was doing calculations. He also added like the Band-Aid to the hand. So this guy really went all out to make this character a memorable one, and for me at least, he was. I really liked this episode a lot. It was interesting to see. Scarly, as I call him, Charlie, was giving himself the injection on the way over because he's got the parasite. Lincoln Lee still got the burn, so I kind of call him Lasagna Lee at this point because it looks like he's got lasagna. And on the Blu-ray, it doesn't quite hold up as well as when I was watching it on TV, but it's still a pretty good makeup effect. But and Olivia tells Frank about Peter, which is interesting. And Frank wants, and because of the previous episode, when Frank comes on scene, everybody's saying, "Oh, you forget Peter. go for this guy. He's much sexier than Peter." So that was kind of a running theme through the rest of the season as we were doing our podcast. It was interesting when Frank told Olivia that he loved her. She didn't respond and like. I don't know if that was intentional or just they didn't want to go there. And it was really cool how the third accident, we thought it was over, and all of a sudden that pen rolls towards that woman's foot, and you're going, oh my goodness, something's going on here. And then that guy gets hit by the ambulance. And then, of course, Milo does the great throw the bike off the bridge, and I love after he jumps onto the truck, and as it's driving away, he does that bring it on kind of gesture to her, like that, and then he crosses his legs. So, yeah, he was just a great guest star. I really liked him. And it was eerie that I think they said he gave him, like, the doctor that they were questioning said that they showed him with the one treatment doing pi while doing the calculus, and they said, and we gave him 5 treatments. And visually, we saw how he was able to, calculate all those multiple possibilities. So this was almost like seeing, like a proto-observer. Observers even more. They must be even more able to, calculate these kinds of possibilities than even Milo was doing. So I enjoyed that quite a bit, and I guess I liked this episode a lot because it kind of had like that Flowers for Algernon Charlie vibe to it, in that he didn't want to go back to being the way he was, but he proactively, took actions to prevent that from happening. Whereas in Charlie, Cliff Robertson's character just regresses back to the way he was. So if you've never seen that movie, it's kind of dated, but the story is still very powerful, and it's well worth checking out.
It's a movie?
Yes, Charlie, with Cliff Robertson. It's an excellent movie. It's dated, though. It's very 60-ish, but the core of the story is still very good. And they're talking about putting Olivia in a sensory deprivation tank, which we know from the previous season. She's been in quite a few times already, so that was kind of interesting. And the end scene with Peter was just fantastic. They're talking about Olivia saying you're not real, and he says, well, real is just a perception, but I'm the part of you that you have to hold on to. And the way she played that scene, she didn't blink, and I didn't catch it, but there's just something when I was watching, and like she's so tense, she's so afraid, she can't move. But they said in the commentary, Anna purposely made sure that she did not blink during that whole scene, because if she closed her eyes, she was afraid that Peter was going to disappear. Wow. And of course, once she kisses him and closes her eyes, then he's gone. So yeah. I just think Anna just killed that scene. So I really enjoyed that scene. And there's a cool thing about the credits, but I think I'll leave that for you, John.
All right, John, you're up.
Okay. What Lou's talking about there is J.H. Wyman's son, Oliver, actually came up with this idea, the story idea. And he said, what if there was somebody who could, I think he said his idea specifically was, what if somebody could control other folks? And they took that and used it into what Milo's character could do, and not control them as such, but know and anticipate their actions and their choices. So that was neat that he got a special thanks in the credits there. I liked that this episode was laying the groundwork for putting the end game together in terms of where things are going to go this season. Especially liked that as Olivia is talking with Madeline, the sister, that the more she peels back the personal layers of their story, the more they're alike, and the more that the facade that Olivia has put on to be the Redverse Olivia is starting to peel back layer after layer after layer. I thought it was very nuanced, very well done. Going off of what Lou had said, Michael Eklund and Casey Roll, who played Madeline, the sister, just gave phenomenal performances. Yeah. And the quote-unquote standalone episodes, because I'm not sure that this really ties in with as a mythology episode. I would categorize this more as a standalone episode. But this, to me, was one of the probably one of the top 3 standout standalone episodes that the series has given us. And a lot of that is due to that guest casting, just like Lou was saying.
Absolutely.
Excellent performances, really, really brought a lot of depth to this episode. Enjoyed seeing Scarlett already questioning whether this is the real Olivia that they're working with, and I always love that sort of mistrust and that he's bringing to the table there. And I loved Milo's line, well, that wasn't supposed to happen, as he slammed into the fence. Also, really loved the horse that she holds up, and it breaks his thought pattern, and in the beginning of the episode, breaks his thought pattern, and it reminded me of the symbolism of the white tulip, and just that object that means so much, that tries to tie back to the foundation of who that person is. So really enjoyed that imagery there. And finally, I think the best line from the episode, Brandon asks Walternate, do you miss it? Do you miss still being a scientist? And Walternate says, I'm still a scientist with a much larger laboratory.
Yeah, it is a good line.
It was a great line. And that's what I got.
Okay. Well, I loved the intro too. You guys talked about it. I won't belabor it. Interesting though, you mentioned. What did you say? Eglund was it David? Was
Mike.
his first? Mike. Okay.
Michael.
Yeah. You said he did he came with the finger thing on his own, and I love that. I love what that brought to the character, and I noticed. I don't think I noticed it the first time I watched this episode, but even like when he was shot in the knee and they put him on a gurney and take him off, even though his arms are strapped down to the gurney, he's still with his fingers sitting there calculating as they wheel him off. Probably thinking about, is there a way he's going to be able to get out of this or something? That's kind of what I thought in my mind, and so it served as a really nice visual cue to his mind is just constantly working, because you can't see what's going on in his mind, but the finger thing really brought that home. I loved it. I thought it was a great nuance. And I'm like you guys, this is one of my favorite intros ever, one of my favorite characters ever, favorite episodes ever. I love this one. So, but you guys talked about that enough already. Let me ask you guys this, and we had this discussion back when this episode aired, but we have more knowledge now than we did back then, and that is about the observers. And one of you guys mentioned that this reminded you of the observers, and me too, and how he's able to calculate probabilities and actions, and even especially when he was saying the words of his sister as she's saying them, he's like, "Oh, that was fun. Let's do that again." Now we know now that observers are humans from the far future, but they have these special gifts that allow them to be able to predict probabilities and behaviors and even words and actions and all that stuff. So my question for you guys is, what we saw here, the research that was being done to enable Milo to be able to do these things, is it a precursor to what will become the observers? Is the research itself, or even, I'll just leave it at that. The research that's being done, is that a precursor to the observers? What do you guys think?
I think it's part of it, and I also think the other research that they were doing with the cortexophan as well, because the observers are able to move through realities and that. So I think I think all these things are going to come together to make up the whole package of what an observer can do.
Okay.
We see the observers with all this new technology, and so we know. Yeah, they've done some kind of research to have all these new things, which then would go into research also in human experimenting. But also, it's been talked about how, like, as linear beings in our timeline, we can conceive, but we can't completely conceive of how time would work and time travel would work, and in the concept of infinity, we never really know what that is, and all that kind of thing.
Right.
So we need extra help with our brain to understand all that. Like the observers have to understand. They see all the options, and they see the past and the future, and that's not what our normal human brains are used to processing.
Right.
So you need something to help you do that, or you have to be different in some way.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think, whereas Milo got to the point where he could no longer communicate, he had to have the computer there to interface.
Exactly.
To have his thoughts. The observers have taken it to the point where they have control over, over these processes, and can manipulate all these things, see the different options and choices. But I wonder, at what point along the way they they decided, well, we're not just gonna watch anymore. We're gonna make things happen. So I hope we get to see some of that in season 5.
Yeah, I do too, and I'm right with you there, John. And that's why I think that this. I agree. I think this serves as this research served as a precursor to what would eventually become the Observers. There's some great things that they were able to do here in Milo, but they were not able to control it. And obviously, the Observers, they seem to be able to control it. I mean, they are able to interact and communicate and even blend into society. And so this is obviously not a finalized. It's still research, and so I have no problem with that. I think it serves nicely as a what could have been, led to the Observers being able to do what they do. So, and I love what Lou said there about the Cortexiphan possibly being what enables them to cross universes. Hopefully, we'll find out in season 5. I would love to see that. It's not going to be a make or break thing for me, but that would be a really cool thing to find out exactly how it came to be that they were able to do these things, so easily. They can cross back and forth easily, and that's always been a challenge with anything that we've seen in Fringe, especially with what we're dealing with in this batch of episodes. They are trying very, very hard to figure out how Olivia can go from one side to the other, and the Observers can do it with ease. Any other thoughts on the Plateau?
I just love the scene when Olivia saw Walter briefly in the hospital, and Walter's got he does that tentative smile.
Yes,
I just found that a very touching moment.
I did have a note here about, and it deals with the scene that we talked about where Olivia not closing her eyes. That's where she was really trying to hold on to Peter, and if she could hold on to Peter, then she could eventually get home. And in season 4, we get that reversed, where we find out that Peter, because he was able to hold on to his love, especially for Olivia, he was finally able to find his way home. All right, let's move on here. The glyphs in this episode spelled breach. And I think there were a couple of different clues for this episode. I didn't find anything officially listed on the Fringepedia page, but I did find a couple of things that I thought pointed to it. We see the Patricia Hotel, and that's named by name in this episode, which Senator Van Horn's wife, her name is Patricia. But we also saw when Olivia confronts Milo on the pedestrian bridge before he jumps down onto the passing van, we see in the background a Van Horn's tavern. So we have Patricia and Van Horn right there. Either one of those could be a clue, or both of them together make Patricia Van Horn, which was, like I said, the senator's wife. Also noticeable in that scene is Oceanic Plaza, which is a lost shout-out. All right, so that gets us into the next episode, Do Shapeshifters Dream of Electric Sheep? The synopsis is Thomas Newton enlists a dormant shapeshifter to deal with the consequences of a recent accident involving a high-ranking politician. Walter and the team gather evidence and move the investigation to Massive Dynamic to deal with the revelations following the accident. Olivia continues her espionage and subversion. This was written by David Wilcox and Matthew Pitts and directed by Ken Fink. And Lou, we are back to you.
Okay. I wonder if they got clearance for this title from Philip K. Dick's estate, but I'm assuming they did because they were able to use it. But this was, this is kind of continuing off of that thing we were sort of talking about, Newton not being happy with Olivia coming in and taking over his, I'm assuming what he believes is his operation. And here we have the same thing with Newton calling one of his operatives out of, or sleeper shapeshifters, I assume, out of his sleep, and Ray, the shapeshifter, as I call him, he's grown attached to the family unit that he's with. So this sets up some interesting dynamics in that, shapeshifters, you're trying to figure out what their limits are. Like, I always sort of thought of them as robots, but by this point, between Ray and Newton, these shapeshifters are very very human-like and very individualistic. So it's very interesting, again, to see how they're playing Olivia and Newton off of each other here, and at this point, I think she's getting pretty flustered, and
Yeah.
The whole scenario with the senator in the hospital, and then Newton shooting him, which was quite jarring, and she's trying to cover her tracks, and she wants to get to the senator's office, and they just play out those moments where Peter pulls out the file of her picture and says, "It's you." And you're kind of going, dun, 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 and he says, "And me," and Walter, and you're going, "Oh, okay." So that was nicely played. And, the talk again about monsters, the little boy. And sometimes Fringe does things a little on the nose with the dialogue, but I didn't mind it too much here with Ray telling the little boy that if sometimes if you get to know the monsters, they're not as scary as you think they are, and they actually might turn out to be your best friends and things of that nature. So, yeah, there was a lot of good stuff in here. And, of course, am I on the right episode? Yeah. Walter's talking about the mind is God, and there's no limits except for the ones that we impose. And he's also self-medicated this episode, exactly. so that's a lot of fun as well. So yeah, there's some other stuff in here as well, but I'll leave that for you guys to talk about.
Yeah, that was a funny scene. Once again, you stole one of my notes, but I'm just giving you a hard time. I really don't mind it in the least. I love the conversation with the kid, and that what I'll add to that was that Fringe is best and works great when it's in that gray area, and it does a great job of some areas are black and white, but it likes to play in the gray. And that line about monsters was totally to the audience saying, you think you know what monsters are, but they're not always the monsters that you think they are. We just saw Olivia shoot this deaf guy in the head, but don't pass judgment on her or the rest of them just quite yet. That's the way I took it anyway. And I love it when Fringe plays in the gray. I think they do a great job of it. All right, John, what about you?
Okay. Well, overall, from the story dynamic, I appreciated that they wrapped up the Olivia and Olivia switch fairly quickly. I mean, next week you guys are going to be talking about how they switch back and everything, but when she comes back and gives Peter such a hard time because she said, "You could have looked in my eyes." At the time I thought, "Oh, that's awful. How could you? That stinks." But I have to say, going back and watching the beginning of this episode, shame on Peter, because she doesn't look like Olivia, she doesn't act like her, she just, and he does address it. He does address it in the cafeteria when he's
right.
like, I'm having trouble with you too, because since you've gotten back, there's all kinds of changes. But he didn't follow it through, and shame on him. So that's all I've got to say about that.
Darn agenda.
I know.
He fell right into it.
I love when he says, "We all draw our moral lines in the sand." I thought that was a great line. Also noticed the mind is God line from Walter there, and then Josh Jackson is wonderful in his delivery when he leans over to Nina and he says, he's tripping out of his mind. You know that, right? She's like, "Oh." Loved the security guard at Massive Dynamics saying, "I've got an Astro, Farnsworth," and she's like, "Yeah, that's me." We see the first butt drive.
Yes.
So that was great to get that part of the story going. Ownership has its privileges. I liked that as well. You're very good at convincing yourself that you don't care. We talked a little bit about this with Newton, and I think Daryl is wanting to get into this more, but just that dynamic and him really pushing her buttons really came to a head here, until obviously she gave him the death chip.
Yeah, whatever that was.
And that, but I have to say that whole end sequence with him dying and Peter and Olivia coming together, which I was so sad for. But that whole entire scene was extremely powerful. The music there was so very well done. Kudos to Chris Tilton.
Yep.
And I know this has been part of the discussion before, but do you think it was? Do you guys think it was her orders to get pregnant? I know they used or were going to use Henry's DNA to get the machine started if they couldn't get Peter and things of that nature. Was that always a backup plan? Or was that just a cause and effect of what she had to do to convince Peter that she was the right one? I don't know where I land on that, but I'd hate to say that she was ordered to get pregnant, but I don't know.
I think it was destiny.
Yeah,
Destiny. I like that. I don't know how he could have ordered her to do that. I mean, there's no way to guarantee that. I mean, even if they are intimate, there's no way to guarantee that the baby's going to result from that. So I'm kind of like you, John. I'm like, I don't know. Was that her orders or not?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't her orders, like, it could have been, like, backup plan J for Walter did, and he's like, well, I know the original Olivia and him are close. Maybe somewhere it might happen. But, like, yeah, I don't think it was an order, but, you know, he might have had some seed of idea, and then when it happened, jump on it.
I could go for that for sure. All right, anything else, John?
No, thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Heather?
Okay, Newton's cell at the end was number CB304, and this is episode 304.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting. And at the first episode, when they're in the restaurant, like, making up stories for different people, Peter says, unless you can put yourself in another man's shoes, you can't judge their situation. And in this case, Ultra Olivia literally gets her chance to be in someone else's shoes.
Right.
And her chance to see what the situation is. And then our other Olivia, she also has the chance to see that, and so they both get their chance to see and decide. Yeah, Newton, when he sees talking to Olivia and saying, Peter unconsciously, he knows she's not his Olivia, but I think, and later, you know, Olivia gives him a hard time, but I think even though he had his doubts, after they slept together, he probably figured, well, I'm committed now, no matter who she is, so then he said, oh, I'm going to forget my doubts. So I guess you can give him points for starting to suspect, but then he just forgot about it, you know, because he had other distractions. But Walter says about the shapeshifter that pretending to have an emotional connection caused a real one to form, which we see with the Senator and with Ray.
Right.
But we can also say this is true of Ultra Olivia, because she starts having feelings for Peter after pretending to. And when Newton, at the end, he's saying her emotions and her integrity are forming a line that she's unwilling to cross, and that will lead to your undoing. And we got the quote from Belle about crossing the line in previous episode.
Yeah.
And we see in Walter's past crossing a line, and Walter crossing a line, and now Newton, you know, in all his missions crossing lots of lines, and then in Alter Olivia, she has her line she finally crosses, and they go too far and they cross the line, and it's hard to come back after you go too far.
Yeah.
And so when they intercut at the end of the episode, we see Newton dying, which is a line that is hard to come back from death there. But then at the same time, you see Peter and Alter Olivia together crossing a line, which you can't come back from either. And so we see her, after he goaded her, again, going and crossing that line, you know, seeing how far they would go, because they go to the line and they step over it.
Yeah.
And this other, my last comment here, Newton talks about, when he's talking to the other shapeshifter, how this is simply a way station on the way up in their mission. And I don't know how, but it ties in exactly, but it made me jump and think of the science fiction book Way Station by Clifford D. Simak, which came out in 1963. But this book takes place in a rural town in the middle of the woods, and this man here on Earth, he's operating this way station for alien travelers.
Okay.
And it has this transporter device. So the transporter receives a signal that's the info of how their information of how their body's made up, and it has their mind, like data. And it reassembles them here at the way station. And then after they're reassembled, then all that information is taken and sent to their next place. And so the idea is the information is sent digitally, and a new body is made for them. And then when they're ready, their intelligence is sent on, but their body stays. And so he has to dispose of their body that's now just this empty shell.
Okay.
While their mind travels on. And so he, in this story, he comes to think of this kind of murder in a way, because all these people are coming in and having this body, and then it's being killed and left. And so we get our shapeshifters, that they take all this information from their humans that they take the place of, so they're disposing of their empty bodies and then taking on the new one.
Right.
But every time they take on a new form with the information in their mind that's the same, they have to get rid of this old body. And so they're transporting through these people's lives, committing murders. And in the book, he signed up to do this, but he starts having second thoughts. And like Ray, who he signed up to do this, but he starts having second thoughts, being like, this isn't as painless as I thought it would be, or now I've developed emotions. It's not painless. And instead of just a clinical takeover and do the mission, he now questions the line and doesn't want to cross the line anymore. So,
what's the name of this book?
Way Station.
Okay. Sounds interesting.
Yep, it's a good book.
Okay, what else?
That's all for me.
Okay. A couple others. For one thing I'll start out with is just the title of the episode. I love the title of the episode. Lou, you asked if they had permission from the Philip K. Dick family or estate to do this. I don't know either, but if they needed such a thing, I'm sure they got it. But if you guys haven't read the book or seen Blade Runner at least, I highly recommend it, not only to watch it once, but watch it multiple times. I've always loved this episode because of what the title means. The title is subtle in that it tells you exactly what it ties into, but you kind of have to know what the story of Blade Runner is, or do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, in order to really get what it means. And I think it's perfect, and I love it. And I think that whole discussion on what is human and emotions, and here's a synthetic intelligence that's actually not designed to have emotions, and yet it is having emotions. And it's really interesting what you guys said earlier in our discussion about Newton and Olivia, and he's getting kind of angry with her, or he feels upset because he's been over here all these years and is now being he has to obey what she wants to do. And he's, in this episode, we see him really thinking less, I'll say, of his counterparts, because they've developed these emotional connections with these people. But in reality, he's developed emotions too. He just doesn't probably realize it, or he's definitely not, he hasn't formed a bond with anybody, but he definitely has emotions too. And so when you think about the whole Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner story, it's perfect. I love it. And I love the dynamic that Newton and Olivia have. I don't care which Olivia it is. We saw the great dialogue that Newton and Olivia had last season, and it's continuing on between faux Olivia and Newton. It's like neither one of them really like Newton, or they just don't get along. And I love that the way they play off of each other, and the tension that is there, and the rivalry that is there. And I really hated to see this character killed off. It's a character that I wish they would bring back. I don't have any hope of that happening, particularly with only 13 episodes left. But, man, I really am sad to see Newton go again. I hated it the first time, and I hate it again this time.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else do I have here? Oh, this is the episode where Baby Nugget was conceived. There at the end of the episode, so we have Newton dying and then the Baby Nugget getting started, I guess, there at the end of the episode. And I'll just briefly hit on what Lou hit on here in this at the beginning of his discussion. I don't know how did nobody see it? She's so obviously not Olivia in this episode. It's so clear that she's not Olivia, that her behavior is off. Man, Peter should have seen it. Walter should have seen it. Astrid should have seen it. Broyle should have seen it. You know, it was so obvious in this episode. But
I'm glad you included everybody else, because sometimes I think Peter gets picked on a little bit too much for being the only one not to notice it.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad too, because at the beginning of the episode we see Olivia and Peter in the restaurant, you know, as you guys mentioned, making up stories for people, and the last couple kind of, Peter says you can tell that they haven't had
slept together
yet, and you can tell that Peter and Olivia haven't either, and they finally do at the end of the episode, and it's not his Olivia, and it's kind of sad to think about. He's thinking that this woman that he cares about, they're having their first experience together, and not her. So it's kind of sad. All right, any other thoughts?
I loved how they were getting close at that moment, and then she backs off and goes to the bathroom, and it's just like, this is too much. This is going too far.
Right.
And I loved that they pulled her back for that moment. That was a great.
Yeah, it's showing that she's developing real feelings for Peter. So.
That's true. That's definitely true.
But still not enough to get past that blind guy, that deaf guy, too.
That's right. We're never going to forgive her for that.
Well, that's the line in the sand that they shouldn't have crossed.
That's right. All right. Any other thoughts on Shapeshifters? All right. Let's see. The glyphs in this episode spelled shift, and the clue was the Hump magazine that Astrid brought into the lab, along with the picture of George W. Bush, to try to get an emotional response out of the senator's body. It had an article on the cover about twins, and twins will play heavily into the next episode, Amber 31422. The synopsis is: the alternate Fringe team has difficulty cracking the sophisticated escape of two brothers from a quarantined area. Secretary Bishop continues his memory experimentation with Olivia in the sensory deprivation tank. Visions of Peter continue to haunt Olivia as she struggles with her new identity. This was written by Josh Singer, Ethan Gross, and directed, that's two people by the way, not one, and directed by David Straighton. All right, John, you are up.
Okay. I loved that this was the story of the Amber. We talked last week that when Ghost Protocol brought the Amber into being, and then, you know, Wyman said in the panel at Comic-Con that, you know, they went back to it and said, hey, we could use that.
Right.
But they made this entire story about it, and it was so well brought to life. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree.
Loved Walternet's line to Broyles when they're sitting in the restaurant, and I remember it so well because it was in so many episodes down the road and previously on Fringe, and they would come back to where this character is, and he says, nature doesn't recognize good and evil, only balance and imbalance.
Right.
I intend to restore balance, whatever it takes. And just remember seeing that over and over and over again. Thought it was a great moment when when Olivia and Lee and Charlie are working on the mold to figure out who was in the Amber, and Charlie says, yeah, my mother made me go get her cigarettes, and the two of them immediately go, aww. It's just great friendship there. People in the Amber are in suspended animation, so, you know, if other folks find that out, there's obviously going to be a huge issue for Walternet to deal with there. So I've found that to be interesting. Peter in the room listening as he's talking to Olivia, and then Lincoln shows up, and he sits there like a fly on the wall and just sort of has this grin on his face. such a great scene as Olivia and Lincoln are talking, and he's just looking back and forth at them like, doggone it, Josh, he's the one that's the robber, right?
I don't remember. Okay.
Yeah. He uses a negative matter ring to get into the buildings and all that, and I'm thinking, isn't that the same weapon that they used in 419 Letters of Transit to blow Massive Dynamic up?
No, that was
matter antimatter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's similar to the episode with the bank vault robbers.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Olivia popping pills every other scene was a little disturbing.
Red pills.
Yeah, red pills.
Yes.
And loved it when one of the twins said, "Just because we look alike doesn't mean we have anything in common." And I was like, "Oh, that's just how meta,
On
how
the
meta
nose.
is that statement?" Yeah. Walternett's line: "Only those that risk going too far find out how far they can go." So I know Heather was talking about that here just a few minutes ago. She crosses over to the other side. That was a great moment. Peter gives her the clue to the case, and I love that he came back and said, "You listen to me about the case. Why won't you listen to me about you? Why won't you listen to me now?" And when she goes over and she calls Ella, I just because I'm the sap that I am, it brought tears to my eyes when she called her, and you heard Ella there. It was great.
And it kind of makes you sad too, because Ella. That was the end of the conversation. It's like, what did Ella have to go through in that moment? Like, Liv, what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, then she's gone.
Yeah.
And my last point is just disturbing and haunting when the wife is telling Josh, he told me about it. He was aware of every moment.
Yeah.
He was stuck in his last thought. And I just thought, that was a very, very visual and the visual's not the right word, but it brought me in as a viewer to say it was so well described, just to think about what that would feel like, and it's just very, very well done. So,
yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, Heather.
All right, I got down the quote when they talked about the bank robbery. They said they used high-frequency vibrations to weaken the atomic structure of the bank walls. So that's, basically the same as what we saw in season 1 when they used the vibrations to get into the bank. So, interesting there. I also noted she takes her red pills to stay in her red universe persona.
Right.
And when she goes into the tank again, and Brandon says how she has a synthetic compound that's been bound to her neurons since she was a child. So that explains why Cortexcan with adults doesn't work. So for adults, it's a foreign matter coming in, but for the children, it's while they were growing, it was in their mind and linked up with everything that was there. And so, we get another reminder. It's a synthetic compound. So this isn't something naturally that happened to her. It was made to happen. Joshua, near the end, when he's in the big vault, tells his brother, "I'm not taking your life twice. Let me do this one good thing." Which made me think of Walter, who takes a life in that he steals Peter. So he's taking that life there. And now he's trying to do the good thing to fix it. Because he's feeling remorse, like Joshua feels remorse for what he caused, the sadness he caused in his family. And that's it on this one.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot on this one. I also noticed the red pill, like all of you guys did. I just realized I haven't let Lou go yet. I'll finish my point and hand it over to Lou.
No, you go ahead this time.
I just have 2 points.
That way he won't take your name.
Yeah,
That's right.
I'll take it from Lou. Yes.
After you.
But after she took the red pill, she put on a blue shirt, and I thought it was It was a nice contrast, taking the red pill to stay in that Redverse mentality, but clothing herself in the blue, which is where she belongs. And I thought that was really cool. And then we saw the brother cut from Amber. When they first took him out, there was a two-step process, and they looked like they used two different lasers. I looked at the structure of the lasers. Even though they both had a red laser, structurally it looked like two different lasers to me. And when they first took the brother out of the Amber, he looked, a whole lot like Walter did in Letters of Transit. And so that was just a nice consistency that we got there with, how you get someone out of Amber. Now, obviously, the method they took to get his body out of the Amber was completely different in this episode. And we knew that. In Letters of Transit, they said that they didn't really have the proper technology and kind of did some sort of makeshift method to get him out, and it worked, although it thrust him up against the wall. And that's it. That's all I have. Lou, what do you have?
Okay. It was interesting that we found it right off the bat that Olivia's been there for 8 days now, and this was the 5th episode of the season. So time is elastic, I guess, in terms of how the story has been progressing. We saw the black hole in Central Park, which of course will play a bigger part much later on. And Walter Tennant said that he first used the Amber on October 17th, 1989. Now, I don't know if that date has any other meaning beyond that what he mentioned there, but that's about 4 years after Walter went across to get Peter. So I thought that was interesting, and I like the fact that the Amber, is set up in this episode that we know that the people are in suspended animation, so that plays nicely into 419 when we see Peter and Walter and Astrid in the Amber and in that episode. So there's a nice connection as well from there. So I don't know if they were thinking that far ahead that early, but they again nicely leveraged off something that they had done in this episode for something later on. I'm just a couple of things that I didn't mention from the commentary that sort of fit into every episode from the Plateau episode. The switching credits, where that came from was, and I'm dating myself here, but if you remember the Adam West TV series, anytime Batgirl came on, they would alter the credits so that you would know that she was going to be on, and they said, "Oh, that's really exciting! Batgirl's going to be on." So that's that was the seed of the idea of where they came with for Fringe to change the colors of the credits depending on which universe they were in or what time era they were. So I thought that was pretty cool as well. And generally, the characters in the B universe to the writers were written to come across as being stronger because they're in a much more of a war state. So the B counterpart characters are usually seen as more written as stronger, more forceful personalities than their counterparts on our side. So I thought that was pretty cool as well. I love the high-tech version of the isolation tank. Which is quite different than the iron chamber that we use on our side. So I thought that was pretty cool as well. And I think that's pretty well everything I have on this one. But another fun episode, and that Olivia lying at that nothing happened at the end. That was interesting as well.
So now we start to see her turn and kind of become the it's going back the other way, which is kind of cool. I mean, Walter Tennant said in the Plateau that she would reach a plateau and then they would know, and she's reached that plateau, and it didn't work the way they thought it did. And the chat room is reminding us. I know we covered this when we did this episode originally, but we hadn't mentioned it in this episode that October 17th, 1989 is the date of the huge San Francisco Bay earthquake. That interrupted the World Series, which was kind of cool because we've seen that tie in with August. In that episode, we saw that her, what was her name? Christine. Her parents were killed during the earthquake. So that's been an event that we've seen have significance in the show before.
Okay, very cool. And the only other thing, and I forgot to mention, is now watching these 5 episodes again, it really strikes me as how important Peter was to Olivia in getting back to the other side, and so how that plays out when people rewatch those episodes down the road from here next week. Obviously, the payoff emotionally is so much greater now that you realize how much of a lifeline Peter had become to Olivia.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Thanks for pointing that out. All right. Any other thoughts on this episode? All right. Well, this was a good batch of episodes, and season 3 is certainly a great season. Can't wait to discuss the rest of it. Next week, we will be talking about 6955 kilohertz, The Abducted, Entrada, Marionette, and The Firefly. Some really, really strong episodes. I say that every week, but it's true every week, you know?
Yep, it is.
It's totally true. So anyway, guys, thanks so much for your insight tonight. I just thoroughly enjoy this every single week, getting to talk with you and the other various folks that we have from week to week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to give our contact information while you guys come up with your witty sign-offs. And let's see, tonight's order was Lou, and then John, and then Heather. So keep that in mind. If you want to send in your feedback to the Fringe Podcast or any of the podcasts that we produce here at Golden Spiral Media, you can do that at feedback@thefringepodcast.com or feedback@goldenspiralmedia.com. You can call us on the Golden Spiral Media voice feedback line at 304-837-2278. You can follow us on Twitter at Fringe Observers and hook up with us over on Facebook at facebook.com/Golden Spiral Media. And our YouTube channel, as I mentioned last week, is youtube.com/The Fringe Podcast. All right, guys, thanks again for joining this week. I thoroughly enjoyed it and really appreciate all your contributions. And until next time, stay Fringe-tastic.
May the reality you find yourself be the one that you want to be in.
Guard your thoughts for whenever your amber comes.
I'm out in a flash of blue light.
The Fringe Podcast and Golden Spiral Media are not associated with Bad Robot Productions, Warner Brothers, or Fox. Golden Spiral Media's use of any and all copyrighted material is only for parody, news analysis, critique, and for educational purposes, as provided within United States Code Title 17, aka Fair Use. Copyright 2012, Golden Spiral Media.